Yes, well, they just changed the name to fancy as well. Yeah, but it will always be coverage to those of us who grew up there. Yeah. Well, mhm. Yeah. I am hoping, that with this new position that I will actually, for the first time in I've been teaching for a while. So, you know, they tell you yes. However,
Apagar aquí y acá, porque en el live stream se ve lavado. Tienes que apagar acá y ya.
No se va a ver igual de lavado.
that's the part that
No, no, es en el live stream.
sorry.
Chequeate si se ve, por favor.
I can change the color and I can change the font.
Mira, si le das aquí, él va directo ahí. ¿Tú lo
A
ves
la
ahí?
3,
¿Ah?
pero se ve virado.
No, pero
Sí, se ve virado. Ponlo como estaba antes.
¿se la ha pasado el papel a todos los demás del registro? ¿No?
¿Cómo se?
No, en vez de nos escucha. Déjame yo.
Uno, dos, buenos días, 1, 2.
Se oye muy bien.
¿Escuchaste? Ok. Pues mira eso. Eso está saliendo por el audio de la computadora, no por el audio del equipo. Habla ahí.
1, 2, probando, 1, 2.
¿Y se escucha bien? ¿No se escucha feedback ni nada? Pues nada, pues déjame hacer.
Ya está corriendo.
Está corriendo, sí.
Ok. Por la página de YouTube de
Humanidades.
Listo. Chequeate.
Ok.
Por la página de Humanidades.
Pues estamos entonces. Esto no está saliendo como se supone. No funciona.
Alex, la página de
A ver, bueno, pues te hablo ahorita.
Humanidades, por ahí está saliendo. Lo que tengo dificultad es con que se vea bien.
Está bien,
Mira, esto mira.
está bien. Lamentablemente se fue así, mija, no hay nada perfecto.
Si alguien le da al preset, vamos, toma. Aquí, mira.
Déjame
Es cuestión
primero conectarme al Wi-Fi.
de darle al 3.
El code está ahí afuera, right?
Si le das al 3, se va a ver la presentación. Si le das al 1, se va al wide angle.
Ok. Déjalo así.
Tendría que haber alguien aquí.
Alejandro. Entonces, quiero cancelar aquí.
Déjame pagar el micrófono. ¿Y si no?
Mite.
Yeah, it's on a piece of paper. Yeah. ¿Qué pasó? Oops, sorry.
Ya te conectado. ¿Dónde está cuál es la dirección del YouTube de
Humanidades UPR-RP.
Bueno, me voy para YouTube y busco Humanidades UPRP. EP.
Ujú.
¿Qué pasó?
Puedes revisar que la querías.
Sí, ya lo hice.
Oh, okay. And everything works.
Yes.
Okay.
No lo veo. Ok, perfecto. ¿Cuál es este?
Sí, el primero.
Ese es el link. Ok, lo voy a tirar por el website y por Twitter.
Puede tocar cualquiera de las dos también. Hola,
Se te va a caer.
And I'm gonna drop it on Twitter. Still, everybody's still
That may be a secret. Yeah,
¿Eso se va a quedar así?
Está en el
The
presentation
water,
mode.
the pen,
Ah,
the
porque
purse.
primero van a darlo bien.
No tengo idea.
Ah, ok.
Para que la presentación se vea mejor para la gente que está viendo el live streaming, si lo quieren hacer, tienen que darle aquí donde dice SMP
And here's a pen.
y darle al 3 y ver lo que pasa. Ah, pero se ve al revés. No sé por qué está haciendo eso. No, déjame.
Ah, ok.
Déjalo así, porque es que si no, no. Mira, eso no es.
No, that's my. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll bring it back.
Déjame, nada, déjalo en el 1 y si yo logro resolver algo, te aviso.
¿Puedo salir de aquí para bajar otra cosa?
Sí. Esta computadora solo tiene las presentaciones.
So this one is in the presentation is in the desktop already.
Okay.
I graduated with bachelor's in. Yes.
Como a las 11, date la vuelta para acá. Gracias.
¿Puedes enviar esa presentación?
¿El qué?
La que me mandó 2-0, porque no la pego. De mi correo electrónico.
Sí. Ok.
¿No tenemos interpretación? ¿Interpretación? ¡Qué chévere! Pues yo no sé, no sabía. Eso me paga la gente.
Eso sí, eso es el amor al arte.
Sí, mira qué calidad de artista tiene. Sí. El side job.
Me sacó de
Pero me
viaje.
gusta mucho porque es como primero que empecé traduciendo, porque ahí viene my skill.
Esto paga mejor, en realidad.
Sí. Ese botón que
Y es
tú
más,
dices que le des.
y hay una gran necesidad porque no hay muchos.
Yo soy una léxica que le describe, siempre es, a mí me toma más.
No
No es severo, pero es costo eficiente,
Tienes que
no,
trabajar
no es tan
más.
costo eficiente para mí como para otra gente.
No. Ok, otra cosa que me está pasando es que me salen 3 monitores cuando me conecto al visito.
¿Quién sí yo tengo tu teléfono?
Yes. Just click on one. Can I download?
Can you download it?
No.
Can you send it directly to me if I gave you an email? I'm the interpreter, so I wanted to see if I can have a copy.
Yeah. We can forward it.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah, that's.
I'm not going to be going through slide by slide.
That's fine.
Sí,
It's just
me
so,
está
so I have a good view of it. That way I can kind of, it helps with the language. Katira, K-A-T-I-R-A. Punto Álvarez @gmail. Great, thank you.
Vamos a sacar tu contacto porque ya lo sé. A veces me la preguntan y yo no sé qué decir. Desde hace tiempo no estoy en el mundo de la traducción.
Pero entonces cuando le doy, lo que te acuerdas que yo te llamé,
Okay, so
que
when you.
ay, exacto, pero entonces tú me dejas hacer el
I don't. No, I'm thinking about.
Después yo necesito que la semana que viene, en algún momento,
And if you don't, that's what I would like. You have it.
ya yo me lo aprendí a usar el sistema. Pero son esos
Oh, I get it all the time. All the time.
Oh, hey.
She has our files on the front in Spanish.
Okay.
No, le voy a mandar los emails a.
Katira. ¿Y el apellido?
Sí, yo lo pongo.
la presentación y cuando se suba ya al final, pones el link, subes eso a un drive y pones la presentación.
¿Está todo bien, Amora?
¿Quieres que me quede?
Sí, pues si acaso. Me da más tranquilidad.
That is funny. The recording machine is not letting me connect from the YouTube.
Le reparto. ¿Cómo
Ella lo
vamos a
estaba
hacer?
mandando.
Mira, y reparto hago lo de las licencias para repartirlo en español, lo que deseen.
Bueno, no aprendí.
No me hace.
No me está bien.
El primer panel es en inglés, así que necesitamos saber quién va a necesitar equipo para la traducción simultánea. ¿Quién va a necesitar equipo para la traducción simultánea? Está bien si necesitan. Hey.
Tienen que ir preguntando uno por uno. ¿Va a necesitar?
¿Va a querer? ¿Van a querer?
Tengo uno. Yo lo tengo.
Voy a mandarte ahora.
Ah, pero no pusiste la
El
tarjeta.
taller de por la tarde va a ser en español.
Este es el de
Así que
cámara.
definitivamente las personas que no son nativos hablantes de español pues van a necesitar la traducción, pero
Tú dijiste eso en español ahora.
Oh, yes. The second panel for the afternoon is going to be in Spanish. For those of you who are
Te voy a mandar
native
las
speakers,
otras dos ahora.
we will have also that same service for you. ¿Alguien más? Nadie quiere su traducción simultánea. Bueno, si lo piensan, me dejan saber y les hacemos llegar el equipo.
Mari Carmen.
Or more. Yes, right there.
I can't absolutely
I have the name. I'm about
Claro, sí. Ahora. Es que nosotros
Gracias, Nadia.
Of course.
Pero espérate. No. Yo necesito hacer la corriente.
Bueno, voy a inspirarme. Ha sido una larga mañana.
Buenos días a todos, todas y todos. Bienvenidos. Mi nombre es Mirza González, soy decana asociada de la Facultad de Humanidades y quiero darles la bienvenida a todos y a todas y a todos, ¿verdad? De manera formal. En la mañana de hoy estamos reunidas en la sala Jorge Enjuto, sala A, para darle continuidad a los trabajos de esta novena edición de la conferencia Caribe Digital, de Caribbean Digital 9. Oficialmente les damos la bienvenida al colectivo para el estudio del Caribe Digital. Hoy en sala se encuentra el equipo completo y me gustaría presentarles a nuestros colegas Kayama Glover, Kelly Baker, Andreina Soto, Tyler Spirit y nuestro colega Alex Hill. Esta conferencia auspiciada por la Fundación Mellon, a quien le agradecemos su generoso apoyo. También queremos agradecer a la Facultad de Humanidades, a la Facultad de Estudios Generales, al programa CRIAS y al Decanato de Estudios Graduados e Investigación de nuestro recinto. Antes de seguir adelante, quisiera pedirle a la decana de nuestra facultad, la doctora Agnes Hodge, que dé la bienvenida a los presentes.
Buen día. Me complace darles la bienvenida a la Facultad de Humanidades, anfitriona de la Conferencia Internacional del Caribe Digital, destinada a expertos interesados en las humanidades digitales. Nos alegra poder retomar los trabajos en modalidad presencial para celebrar esta importante actividad que ha estado realizándose en formato virtual por los pasados 2 años. Durante el día de hoy estaremos presenciando varias conferencias. La primera, Datos como Memoria y Memoria como Datos en el Caribe, moderada por el Dr. Alex Hill. Y la segunda, Estado de Emergencia, el rol de las humanidades digitales en la documentación de las políticas y prácticas de autogestión sostenible en Puerto Rico entre 2017 y 2022, moderada por la doctora Mirza González. Ambas tienen como propósito resaltar los esfuerzos de preservación y difusión del patrimonio cultural y la memoria colectiva realizadas por varios grupos comunitarios en Puerto Rico y el Caribe. Esta iniciativa es posible gracias a la colaboración entre la Universidad de Puerto Rico, Barnard College, Yale University y la Mellon Foundation. Para nosotros es muy importante porque nos permite cumplir con nuestras metas y objetivos institucionales en las áreas de investigación, ya que incorporamos a nuestro quehacer a docentes, bibliotecarios, investigadores y estudiantes subgraduados y graduados, de servicio a la comunidad, gracias al continuo intercambio con organizaciones sin fines de lucro, cuyos proyectos atienden diferentes necesidades en contextos variados. De divulgación, pues los resultados de estos trabajos forman parte de conferencias como esta y de publicaciones diversas. Y finalmente, de internacionalización, pues reunimos en este contexto colegas de otras instituciones en los Estados Unidos y en el extranjero. Y porque atendemos un tema que nos atañe a todos en este contexto insular, ¿verdad?, que es nuestro entorno geográfico más inmediato, el Caribe. Quisiera agradecerles a todos su comparecencia y a los organizadores y estudiantes su entusiasmo e incansable trabajo. Mucho éxito.
Muchas gracias, decana. Esta actividad de hoy se une a varios esfuerzos que hemos iniciado e implementado este semestre en el recinto de Río Piedras. Durante los meses de septiembre, octubre y noviembre hemos estado presentando ante la comunidad universitaria un ciclo de conferencias abiertas para el desarrollo de destrezas en áreas relacionadas a las humanidades digitales y que ha estado bajo la tutela de nuestro académico residente, la profesora Ángela Aponte González. También desde el mes de agosto, un grupo de 10 estudiantes subgraduados de diversos programas de nuestro recinto han estado trabajando como DH Scholars in Residence de nuestro, ¿verdad?, en nuestra comunidad, recibiendo talleres formativos y prácticos en humanidades digitales, trabajando con mentores, algunos de los cuales están aquí. Quiero agradecer su presencia a la profesora Silva, el profesor Latorre Este ejercicio que estamos haciendo nos ayuda a promover las humanidades digitales como una disciplina académica, a la vez que estrechamos lazos con colegas en nuestra institución, en otras instituciones, y así creamos solidaridad y crecemos juntos. Quiero agradecer nuevamente al equipo de trabajo de la Facultad Mari Carmen, que lleva 2 días conmigo, 24 hours, ¿verdad? Trabajando con los asuntos tecnológicos. Este equipo que ven que estamos utilizando es un equipo nuevo que llega al recinto después de 5 años de haber estado esperando por el embate del huracán María. Recibimos este equipo para poder facilitar actividades como esta y poder transmitir en ambas vías. Quiero también reconocer la presencia de líderes comunitarios que nos acompañan hoy, quienes han estado también colaborando con nosotros, y quisiera entonces dar inicio a los trabajos de la mañana, deseándole a todos y a todas y a todos un día productivo de intercambio y aprendizaje. Muchas gracias. Voy entonces a pasar los trabajos al doctor Alexis.
Buenos días. Gracias por la invitación. Es un honor para nosotros estar aquí hoy con ustedes. Yo voy a moderar el primer panel sobre la data como memoria, memoria como data, data as memory, memory as data. Y antes de invitar a los panelistas, los voy a introducir. En este orden van a hablar los panelistas. Kelly, just to check really quick, you said in the order we have Nick Tay first, or Stephanie. Stephanie, you're going first. Okay. So Stephanie Chansey from Florida International University for now. La doctora Chansey obtuvo un bachillerato en Ciencias de la Comunicación con una doble concentración en Historia, así como una maestría en Artes y Estudios Liberales, con énfasis en Historia en la Universidad de Miami. Además, posee un doctorado en Historia de la Universidad Internacional de la Florida. Su trabajo incorpora elementos de la historia de los Estados Unidos, la historia del Caribe y la historia europea, así como piezas materiales como pinturas, esculturas y fotografías. Ha curado varias exposiciones que destacan el arte haitiano y cómo se cruzan el arte y las tradiciones haitianas, europeas y estadounidenses. Mientras completaba su disertación, la doctora Chansey se desempeñó como becaria de posgrado de The Green Family Foundation en la Biblioteca Digital del Caribe. La doctora Nicte Fuller Medina es lingüista e investigadora. Sus intereses de investigación se orientan al estudio del desarrollo histórico de la mezcla lingüística en el habla espontánea en Belice. Asimismo, por medio del proyecto Idioma, Cultura e Historia, Belice en la Era Digital, se ha dedicado a crear una base de datos digital de grabaciones antiguas de las variedades beliceñas del español para aportar al campo de la ciencia lingüística. De esta forma, busca examinar la manera en la que los datos disponibles promueven nuestra comprensión de los contextos multilingües. La doctora Jessica Marie Johnston es profesora en el Departamento de Historia de la Universidad Johns Hopkins y es miembro del Centro Hutchins de Estudios Africanos y Afroamericanos de la Universidad de Harvard. Como historiadora en estudios afroamericanos, Johnson investiga las luchas por la libertad de la diáspora negra desde la esclavitud hasta la emancipación. Como humanista digital, explora las formas en que los medios digitales y sociales difunden y crean narrativas históricas, en particular historias comparativas de la esclavitud y las personas afrodescendientes. Ahora los invito a recibir a Stephanie, Nicte y a Jessica al panel.
Para la traducción simultánea, alguien que se anime a utilizarlo. El panel es en inglés, los que acaban de llegar. tenemos traducción simultánea. Me avisan cualquier cosa y les llevo el aparato.
Stephanie, la primera la presentación.
¿Cuál?
Todavía de qué.
Sí, que estamos corriendo la pantalla. ¿Y qué va a hacer acá? Para que ya la pase. Porque me estoy viendo el resto. ¿La pasa ahí?
No,
Sí. ¿Será esto?
no me la hice.
¿Ella le puede dar ahí?
El presentation no.
¿Le puede dar ahí mismo para que la vaya pasando? Sí.
Okay. Yeah, that's okay. I can look there.
Okay. Just look over.
Yeah.
Thank you. Sorry.
That's okay. It wasn't me. And this proves why God made me a historian and not a technical person. Good morning, buenos dias.
Buenos días.
Let me open my. It is a great pleasure for me to be here and an honor for me to be part of this wonderful panel with such wonderful scholars. I am a little intimidated. I thank the conference organizers for inviting me to participate today. My presentation is going to have 3 parts. An introduction to the Digital Humanities Project that actually got me invited to the conference. I'm going to talk about the part of Haitian history that inspired this Digital Humanities Project. And I'm going to conclude by talking about the dilemma that the project team faces working with historical sites and sites of memory as data. Since time is short, I'm going to quote everybody's favorite movie, The Princess Bride, and I will only stick at, see, I knew it. Everybody loves The Princess Bride. And I'm only going to give you the good parts. Visualizing colonization and Haitian sovereignty, documenting Haiti's forts, is a National Endowment for the Humanities funded project. And the aim of the project is to bring visibility to Haiti's forgotten historical monuments. The project team is exploring the feasibility of creating a low-cost, open-source, offline, and/or minimal computing digital map. That's a mouthful. And what we hope, the data set that we're using are the historic fortifications that dot Haiti's landscape. The aim of the project and to focus on these historical monuments and the Haitian patrimony is a shift away from digital disaster mapping, which is what usually happens. A disaster happens and they go in and they map the areas that have been affected by the disaster. But what we want to do is shift the attention away to cultural patrimony. The hope is that this is going to change the usual narrative that we have about Haiti. And we all know that usual narrative: poverty, political corruption, disasters, natural disasters, upheaval. Now, all of these are acknowledged parts of Haiti's story, but it's not the only part of Haiti's story. And what we hope is that our project will highlight that there are other aspects to Haiti's story, changing that one narrative to reflect the many narratives that do exist. Our team is, oh, I forgot that one. Our team is multidisciplinary. We have an archaeologist who has worked on digs in Haiti. We have a DH specialist who's sitting right over there, whose work often highlights the Caribbean. We have a GIS mapping specialist with extensive experience in Haiti. And we have two men who have worked for decades on preserving and documenting Haiti's cultural patrimony. And then there's me, the historian. And as the introduction indicated, my research focuses on material culture. So I use art objects, architectural objects to understand history and to help others understand history. And my research also often touches on Haiti. And I will, full disclosure, I'm one of those people that for the computer, I like to push a button and look brilliant. And often when I want, I often want the computer to do stuff that does not actually exist, except maybe in Star Trek or Star Wars. So I defer to those with greater knowledge when it comes to the computer stuff. I have no problem. We believe that the determinations that we make as part of this exploratory phase is something that can be later applied to mapping other sites in the Global South and in the Caribbean. The one thing that we want to do, and that's why we're intent on finding and figuring out what it would take to create one of these low cost or no cost, preferably, mapping applications that would that can work in a minimal computing environment, is because we really do not want to recolonize the data by making it inaccessible to the people in country. So if Haitians can't use it, or somebody living somewhere else in the Caribbean or the Global South cannot use the map, then it's the aim of the project has not been met. Why did we choose forts? Well, they're really, really cool. But actually, we had quite a bit of information on the forts in Haiti because of the work of the organization, the Institut de Sauvegarde du Patrimoine National, ISPAN, because it's a mouthful. They have a lot of information about forts. And in fact, a lot of the information that I'm going to share with you, I actually got from the newsletters that ISPAN publishes that are available on DLOC, dloc.com. I'm selling it. The forts also give us insight into French, British, and the Spanish colonial experiences in Haiti, because they were all there. We gleaned some information about the period of US occupation between 1915 and 1934. They give us information on colonial and post-colonial defense strategies, building techniques, and state building programs in the new Republic of Haiti. And they also indicate the relationship that Haitians have with their cultural patrimony. Generally speaking, forts in Haiti are either from the colonial era or from the period immediately following independence. Typically, a fort like Fort Picolet in Cap-Haïtien is classified as being a colonial fort. Colonial forts tend to be placed on the shores, on the coastlines. They face outward. One like Citadelle La Ferrière, also known as Citadelle Henri. This one is classified as post-independence. These post-independence forts tend to be placed on top of mountains, inland, and they face inward. Citadelle La Ferrière and its companion site, the fortifications at the Ramier, which I don't have pictures of, tower about 3,000 feet above the town of Milo in northern Haiti, the northern department of Haiti. The town of, oh, I guess one of my slides got deleted. Go with the flow. There's another town also in the central part of Haiti that has 6 forts ringing the town, and they're all, except for one, they're all on top of mountains. The one that's not on top of the mountain is guarding the source of water. And what is interesting is that the forts, because they are on top of the mountain, they can see the valley, and they are in visual communication with each other. So this was definitely a line of defense. These forts, particularly the post-independence forts, were built after 1804, after Haiti had declared or gained its independence. And they were built on the orders of Jean-Jacques Dessalines, the first governor general of post-independent Haiti, who eventually declared himself Jean-Jacques Ier, the first emperor of Haiti. But Citadelle is, of course, most closely associated with Henri Christophe, who became the first king of Haiti. And a lot of people say, because it's out, that Wakanda is maybe based a little bit on the Black Kingdom of Haiti, the kingdom that Henri Christophe built. You knew I had to work that in, right? Let's see if that works. Interior region, and there we go. Oh, there's the one I was looking for. So this is the one that in Dessalines' new capital after independence, he called it Marchand Dessalines. And this is the one where they have the 6 forts ringing the town. I was speaking with somebody who is a self-described aficionada of Haitian forts. She has apparently traversed Haiti photographing the forts. The second one, the one of Fort Décidé, it's one of her pictures. She tells me that some of the forts are actually smaller than one would imagine. The size notwithstanding, what these fortifications represent is control. Control of the land, control of the means of communications, control of the roads. They were also potential safe havens for the residents of the towns whose landscapes they dominated. What was interesting to learn, though I think I probably knew this on a subconscious level, Dessalines' forts never actually had to contend with a full-on military invasion. So we can only speculate as to their effectiveness as a defense system. Perhaps the efficacy of the system was as a deterrent. What it did is it showed the former colonial authority and the potential recolonizers, because one of the things that we have to remember is that in 1804, when Haiti declared its independence or gained its independence through blood, sweat, tears, violence, is that they were surrounded in the Atlantic by slave-owning colonies. The nations were still, these colonies that surrounded them, and the United States, which was one of their trading partners, slavery still existed there. So they were this one beacon of Black freedom in the Atlantic world. So what these forts showed the potential colonizers or recolonizers is that the newly minted Haitians were determined to resist any and all encroachments on their republic. They were ready to fight to maintain their hard-earned independence. Interestingly, after Dessalines was assassinated in 1806, some of these forts were abandoned. His successor, Alexandre Pétion, who became the first president of the Republic of Haiti, took a less martial approach when it came to dealing particularly with France. He was seeking recognition for the Republic of Haiti, so he took a more diplomatic approach. So a lot of these forts were abandoned back in the 19th century, in the early 19th century. Eventually, the French did recognize Haiti sometime around 1820, 1830, but along with that recognition came the 150 million franc indemnity that you all, I know you read the New York Times story about that. Over the course of the 19th century, Dessalines forts were abandoned and thus exposed to the ravages of nature and to that of man. Some were forgotten, even by Haitians, and especially those who did not live in close proximity to the forts. But these are historical sites of memory, and they have layers of meaning depending on whom you speak to. For the Haitian government, these monuments are tangible illustrations of power and a lasting representation of national identity and a shared past. The anthropologists, Pamela Geller and Louis Ernst Marcelin, found that for local residents, these sites of memory and history are a part of everyday life. For example, that's the one I want. At Christophe's Palais de Sans-Souci in Millau, Geller and Marcelin state that, quote, children play on adjacent terraced fields, and perching on its walls, students review lessons for school exams. Couples who are out for a romantic moment will go and, we'll say, canoodle. Within the among the broken walls. And sometimes they will formalize that canoodling by getting married within the ruins of Sans-Souci. They further explain that the locals in Haiti feel a communal sense of pride in the monuments and in the fact that their ancestors built them after having fought their way out of enslavement and into independence. In Jacmel, which is in the south, Stephanie Kersey, this is one of her pictures, she indicates that they have a regular soccer match within Fort Auger, which is in Jacmel. So they use them, they feel that it is part of their everyday life. These monuments are also sites of religious significance, as locals hold Vodou ceremonies there. The push, especially in Millau, to turn the forts and other buildings into tourist destinations has changed the relationship that locals have with the monuments. These have now become a source of potential income for them. Sadly, the historical ruins in Haiti are disappearing, and the reasons are manifold. Natural disaster, some because of climate change. In a conversation with Stephanie Kersey just last week, she mentioned that the locals raid the sites for building materials. Others have told her that the forts, the monuments, not just the forts, but other historical buildings as well, that they were, quote, eaten by the sea. Because, and I was shocked when she said some of them are underground. Regularly, the 18th and the 19th century cannons that are in many of these forts are stolen. Apparently, it is not uncommon for a helicopter to swoop in the dead of night and lift out a helicopter and lift up the cannon, not the helicopter, lift up the cannon and whisk it off to collectors in parts unknown. I mean, when she told me, yeah, they regularly steal the cannons, I'm like, how? How the heck do they steal the cannons? So now we come to the dilemma that we face with this project. Should we pinpoint exactly where these structures are on a digital map? Would this open them up to further depredations if the information is available more widely than it already is? When we had our meeting and our archaeologist was part of it, he was the one who brought it up. I mean, that we had a historian, a digital humanities person, and a GIS person, and two guys who go around photographing and documenting the monuments. None of us thought of this. And then he's like, well, what if they come and they, raid the sites? And they already raid the sites. But the problem with that is that when they go in, they also destroy valuable evidence because they consider it trash. Our trash is absolute treasure trove of information for archaeologists and even historians, because it gives us so much information. But then when I was having that conversation with Stephanie Kersey, she said the sites are already being destroyed, and there's no documentation of the sites. And I'll leave you a pretty picture for a moment. They are fast disappearing, and there's very little record of them. So is it now our duty as scholars, as historians, digital humanities people, as archaeologists, is it now our duty to document them by showing where the traces at least existed? And as a person who does material cultures, who I work with objects, pictures, I'll take pictures. Is that not our duty? The question, I don't have any answers. Maybe y'all can offer some suggestions for us. The sites in the more remote areas and the less tourist visited areas are in the most danger. Those, for example, in Port-au-Prince, the capital, or Cap-Haïtien, Cap-Haïtien, are better known and documented and have a degree more protection. But in a country like Haiti, where the needs are so great, the preservation and protection of old buildings is not at the top of the priorities list, understandably. And even the most famous monuments are in danger. And there is no better example of this statement than the Royal Chapel of Our Lady of the Immaculate Conception, which is part of the National Historic Park in Millau and placed near Sanssouci Palace. In fact, the ruin that you see on the side there, that is the remnant of Sanssouci. The chapel is known for its iconic black dome. Well, in April 2020, the chapel was destroyed. This was not arson. This was not random vandalism or mischief that got out of hand. Rather, it seems that it was just a tragic accident caused by a local who likely saw the chapel as his heritage. So the Haitians, as Marcelin and Geller explained, Haitians make a distinction. There's patrimony, which is anything that is identified as Haitian, and there is heritage, héritage. And that is things that they feel have come down to them, that belong to them, that their ancestors left for them. So to them, the monuments belong to them. They are their heritage. They are their héritage. So that's why they feel no compunction. They don't feel anything, that there's anything wrong with them. I need to build a wall in my house. Let me go get some bricks from. So this person, it was apparently a chilly night, and he took refuge in the church and lit a fire to keep warm, and it got out of control. After hearing this story and speaking with Stephanie Kersey, I cannot help but think that creating a record of these rapidly deteriorating and endangered sites of history, memory, and patrimony is actually a very pressing need. And as I said, I promised you the quick versions and only the good parts. So I thank you very much for your time and your attention. Muchas gracias. I will leave the technology to you guys.
I wanna try with the turn off the light.
Yeah, go.
persona entonces.
Pero no. Pero no lo necesito ver aquí.
So that's better. Everybody fine with this? Yeah, okay.
So you wanted to look at that. Oh, yeah, so sorry.
The screen cannot see it on the live stream, then there's no point.
Which one is the first one?
Then there's no point.
Robot.
Unless there's a share screen.
There's no there's no point
Sorry,
in
but that's what
in this.
Stephanie had to do.
We can leave it like
Okay,
this.
can we turn this a little bit?
Not really.
Putting my back.
Because
Okay,
everything is, yes, I'm sorry. And then.
Are we ready?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Good morning. Can I start?
Go.
Okay. Good morning. Buenos días. Really happy to be here para compartir con ustedes. As mentioned in the bio, I'm a linguist. I'm going to be talking about language as an archive and archives of language. And as a linguist, I'm interested in how multiple languages come together in Belize, Spanish, English, and Creole, which are the majority languages. And so I'm really interested in how speakers in their everyday lives navigate multiple grammatical systems in the same utterance, while simultaneously navigating ideological systems in terms of where Spanish, English, and Creole are socially located in Belize. And so when I talk about language as archive, this isn't my idea. Others have done this where they use linguistic evidence to reconstruct history, because the presence of certain words or the use of certain words in a language can be traced back historically. And so each word comes with a whole story. And so language itself is archiving social context, archiving history, archiving migrations. And so I'm going to talk about this example in a bit, but this is from my research where I did an elicitation task to look at these constructions called bilingual verbs, bilingual compound verbs. And I asked the interviewee, what's happening in this picture? And they said, tiene miedo que se haga drop. So the person with the hand on the face is afraid that the skateboarder is going to fall. And so when I talk about language archiving history, this construction here is telling a whole story about Spanish, English, and Creole in Belize. It's carrying a whole lot of history there. It tells the story of Spanish colonialism, who were the first documented Europeans in the region, obvious from the Spanish portion of the sentence. But it also tells the story of Yucatec Maya resistance. In the 1850s, because of war on the Yucatan Peninsula, Yucatec Maya people and some Mestizex people migrated south to what is now northern Belize. And this structure, agadrot, that has a Spanish verb and this non-Spanish verb together to form a bilingual verb. This one here is Spanish and Creole, but the precursor to that is Spanish Maya bilingual verbs. And I have an example there, Haciendo Tomokchig, which is about foreboding. It's a story somebody narrated about the belief about owls. When a particular owl called the Soch flies overhead, it's foretelling the death of someone in the house. And that's Hacer Tomokchig. And so this sentence here is also telling that story. It's also telling the story of British colonialism. As we know, it's during that period that Creole languages were formed, and this drop that's in that sentence is Creole. It's also telling the story of contemporary state ideologies, because in the early data that I look at, I find these Spanish Maya bilingual verbs in data from the late 70s, but in contemporary data that I collected in 2013 and 14, I start to see Spanish Creole constructions. And Creole is starting to be used in Mestizex communities and not just in Creole communities. And I attribute that in part to state ideologies around the period of independence, where Belize Creole was recruited as a unifying force in the pro-independence propaganda. So why was Belize Creole a good candidate for this? Well, it's not Spanish, it's not associated with Guatemala, who has a claim on Belize, a long-standing claim on Belize. It's not British, right? Because we want to separate from the UK, even though we still keep English as the official language. But Creole is seen as the only language that was created on the territory, right? So it's associated with the creation of the nation state. And it's becoming a marker of Pan-Belizean identity. But this structure also tells a story of erasure, right? So Yucatec Maya is a very vulnerable. It's endangered in northern Belize. Doesn't have as much linguistic vitality as in, let's say, on the Yucatan Peninsula, even though it's vulnerable there as well. And so it's also telling the story of a shift away from Maya and Spanish Maya bilingualism, and erasure of the Black body, because Belize Creole is then now no longer associated only with Black communities, but it's for everybody because it's a marker of Pan-Belizean identity. And then, of course, it's showing linguistic agency. So speakers don't adopt the colonial languages wholesale and replicate those languages, but they recruit all the linguistic resources available and deploy them in ways that make sense in their everyday lives. So when I talk about language as archive, while I'm not reconstructing history, because I have pretty good access to the historical record for the past 150 years, I'm still showing how it reflects that history and reflects that social context. But as linguists, we also archive language. And so here I have an example of one of the archives that has digital collections of languages. And the purpose behind this is really for research. And they've done a really good job with a lot of things. The Language Archive, they've developed software for transcription, which I use, that's very useful for time-aligned transcription, where the sound is aligned with the text that you're creating. And then the older recordings of Belizean varieties of Spanish, these were interviews collected by Tim Haggerty in the late 70s when he was doing his PhD at UCLA. And he did an analysis, one of the first documented analyses, systematic analyses of the varieties of Spanish spoken in Belize. And that's a data set that I'm working on archiving, digitizing, archiving, and going to make public hopefully soon. But there are other archives of language as well. So any kind of AV recording takes a snapshot of language as it's spoken at that point in time. So one of the things I'm interested in is how do these multilingual linguistic practices develop over time? How does language change and vary over time? Well, in order to understand that, having an actual benchmark, an actual snapshot from an earlier point in time is just gold for a linguist. And so recordings, I'm showing here a set of cassette tapes from the Irvin Beck folklore recordings. So that wasn't collected as linguistic data, it was collected as folklore. And Belize Archives and Record Services has a series of AV recordings from the independence celebrations, for example. So I'm going to be really interested in looking at that to see how language was being recruited at that specific point in time. They have some recordings going back to the 50s, folk songs by mahogany cutters, music, documentary of the hurricane in 1931. So all of those are snapshots of language at an earlier point in time. And so those are also archives of language. So my work is at this intersection. So where I'm looking at linguistic data as patrimony, because it's an archive of history, also because of the content of the interviews, which documents cultural practices and oral history. And then I'm looking at AV recordings, which are intended to document cultural patrimony as linguistic data. So there's this tension then between patrimony and data, because those collections are treated a little differently. They're not necessarily treated the same, and sometimes they're located in different places. So the older recordings of Belizean varieties of Spanish, those recordings that are collected for linguistic analysis generally reside within the researcher's personal collection. Some of the cultural patrimony, like the folklore recordings, was in a personal collection for a long time. And then patrimony, some of it is documented locally at archives or the local libraries. But what does it mean given the colonial underpinnings of research in a region, but particularly around linguistics and archiving, where we know historically records are kept away from the communities for whom they're most relevant. And then we know that usually it's not community members that have had access to resources of time, money, equipment, and mobility in order to make these types of recordings, to document culture, to document language. And so it's usually outsiders, more often than not outsiders from the global north, who are doing this kind of work and who have created these recordings. The other issue is that many of these recordings are still inaccessible because they're in analog format, and we need this legacy equipment to be able to listen to them. And it's becoming harder and harder to obtain legacy equipment, to find people who can repair legacy equipment, to find all the right connections, even if you've found the right equipment, in order to be able to digitize. There's a lot that goes on in between that you need the right connections to be able to do that. And so one of the ways that I'm working at countering those colonial practices, and I really like the way that Dr. Chansey talked about not recolonizing the data, right? So we want to make it available, accessible. How can we do something different? I really want to work in a way that's different from the models that have been presented to me in academia, but particularly in sociolinguistics, where the linguist collects the data, keeps it only for themselves, and there are lots of good reasons for that, right? You have to build your career, you have all these pressures for tenure and promotion, and it takes time to analyze data. So I do quantitative analysis. I rely on multiple interviews to put lots of data together to look at patterns. Or what happens is that these data get archived in sociolinguistic labs. And if you want to access it, you actually have to physically go to the lab. First, you have to ask permission. Then you have to physically go to the lab to be able to access that data. And so we have to think about a few things: ethics, ownership and permissions, and access and discoverability. But in terms of ethics, we have to think beyond an institutional review board, which normally approves research. First, an institutional review board has a role to protect the institution, right? Second, they don't have a capacity or a way for evaluating and assessing how to handle patrimony, because usually what they're looking at is a research study. And so thinking beyond what an institution requires in terms of ethics, and this overlaps with the other two, because it's really thinking about how an ethics of care in handling the data, and ethics of care in working with communities, and thinking about how we're going to work with this data in order to counter those colonial practices that helped create it in the first place. And then in terms of ownership, thinking about in linguistics, researchers, there isn't anything really written or anything that's been passed down to me, but the practice is that you own your data. That's not entirely true legally, but that's the practice. And so there's some cases that I know of, for example, where an outsider scholar studying Native American languages will get a request from somebody from the community to access that data. And the community member, community insider scholar, is denied access to the data. I know of other cases as well with Creole data. So that really reflects the practice and what the accepted practice is, that you own that data, you control that data, and so it's up to you what kind of access you're going to allow to that data. In terms of the permissions, the part that I think about that's related to ownership is, how can I come to a decision that doesn't rely just on accepted practice, and that actually works in collaboration with communities so that they say what they want to happen to their data? right? How do they want the data used? How do they want it represented? So I would like to make it open access, but I don't think I can make that decision on my own without consulting. So for example, there's some recordings that have some pretty racy jokes that are told. There's like a half hour of Quevedo stories. There's some Anansi stories that are also pretty kind of sexually explicit. And you might say, well, it's not up to you to determine what should be made public or not. You can't edit the record. But the community might decide, you know what, we don't want to be represented that way. If those are going to be the only stories from our town, we prefer that you not put it online. But I don't know, right? So that's part of the discussion that has to happen. I'm hoping to do that next summer. Because of COVID, I haven't been able to engage fully in that sense. And then, of course, in terms of access, I showed you images of analog data and talked about how they're not really accessible because of issues with equipment and not being available to the public because they could be damaged easily. And so, as I mentioned, I'm going to work with the source community. So my way of countering the colonial practices is through repatriation and restitution. And so I'm going to be working with source communities, hopefully locating family members or individuals who were interviewed for that collection to get permissions, as well as setting up on-site access in Belize. In the first instance, I have an agreement with Belize Archives and Record Services that I'm going to deposit the physical objects there. Also deposit a digital copy of the recordings once everything is set up. And that's in the first instance. So I don't consider that if it's in one place in Belize, it's available and accessible to everybody. But that's the first step. And then online through digital libraries of the Caribbean. And we can talk a bit more about that in the question period. But there are two reasons for that. One, as part of my sustainable research practice, I like to leverage what's already existing rather than trying to recreate the wheel. And Digital Libraries of the Caribbean has an infrastructure. It's a known entity in Belize. Somebody wants to know about the Caribbean. Even though Belize is both Central American and Caribbean, Digital Libraries of the Caribbean might be a place that they check. And then another reason is this repatriation online. So while online isn't going to be fully accessible in Belize, there are very large diaspora communities in the US, in New York, Chicago, and LA. And so there's a partial virtual repatriation via putting it online. And that's it. Thank you very much.
Mira, se quita tu email.
Sí. Yeah. Okay. Is that okay?
Yeah, it's great. All right. Hello. Good morning. Hi, everybody. Good morning.
Good morning.
Yeah, so, I'm probably gonna speak fast. If I speak too fast, just raise your hand and be like, no, slow down. Okay. So we're gonna do this really quickly. It's gonna be a lot of fun. And we're gonna do a little really quick call and response so I know everybody's paying attention. The point of this panel I want everybody to take away from is that Black Puerto Rican data is recovering our history, our ancestors, and our history of resistance. Okay? So our history, our ancestors, and our history of resistance. Okay, so I'm not going to do all of the slides in this presentation just as a warning, but I'm here representing Taller de Aguas, which is the Diaspora Solidarity's Lab Micro Lab. I see DSL folks in the audience. Ow. Okay, perfect. We are funded by the Mellon Foundation, so it's always good to mention that, and excited to be here. Thank you guys for inviting us. Okay, all right. I am here Bello de Aguas, as you can see, is made up of 2 data projects, but has a larger purpose in that it is thinking about how we can think about Black Puerto Rican life and experiences and history, cultura, all of these different things in the context of moving across waters. So I'm born in Chicago, Chi Rican, Diaspora Rican, however you want to think about it. My mother is out of New York, South Bronx. My abuela, who recently passed, is out of Utuado. I have family here in San Juan, and Carolina, and Utuado, and a whole bunch of different places. And all of us have various kinds of connections here, to the island, to the diaspora, broadly, all such things. And so we're thinking about what does it mean to think across the waters, right? And in terms of our projects, Dr. Sarah Bruno is the lab lead. She could not make it today, but she is here in absentia. We also have Isa Diaz and Carlos Bobri-Casado. Isa is here, raise your hand, give us down, yes, and have been working very closely with the Registro, which is a project I'm going to talk very, very little bit about today. And Carlos is also here. He's working with the Criadas project, which is the other data-related project that we are working with. I want to make sure that I breeze through some things. All right, so really quickly.
Yeah, we're doing good on time.
Yes, take your time. Take your
These slides
time.
we want to steal.
See all of this. There's a lot of slides. We're not going to see all of this. But okay, so one of the questions that often has come up, and I've been doing Black Puerto Rican work or Black Latinidad work since 2009, working with the Latinegros Project online. And so one of the things that has often come up in terms of thinking about Black life in Latinx communities, Latin American communities, and Puerto Rico as well, is how to find Black people. How do you clock it? How do you count the numbers? What state institutions are doing that kind of work? Some of the work around this has been happening here, in particular under Isa Boudreau and the work that she has been doing around the census, as well as other things. Yes, dance for your work, and other kinds of the representations of Black Puerto Ricans and histories of slavery and Africans in curriculum, in social science data, a whole host of things. And so that work is happening. Also happening right now is work that's happening at Centro, the Center for Puerto Rican Studies in New York, and Bonilla, and folks who are in the Data Hub, who are doing work around how do you collate data that already exists, that the state is already generating, either through federal institutions or at local levels. So what I don't have on here is a slide for that, but they did an amazing Data Hub workshop at PRSA, Puerto Rican Studies Association, which is RicanStudies.org, about the ways that they're bringing together this information that, because of empire, is separated and siloed in various kinds of locales. But if you bring it together, you actually get a better picture of both of the austerity that empire has imposed on Puerto Ricans broadly on the diaspora and the island, and also what is available. Like, where are the actual daycare centers? Where are schools? Which schools are open? And they're right now working on data related to the census. So these are returns from the census, the last census, that may actually even be updated now because they're still, pulling together the information and the materials that talk about the different ways that race, that individuals are showing up by race in the material, et cetera. And this gives us a little bit of just a sense of the place that has changed. Now, one of the reasons I want to show this is because this is work that has been part of campaigns over the last decade in order to have Puerto Ricans everywhere begin to think differently about how we clock our own race and our own racial history. What are the ways that we can think about marking multiple races in the census, et cetera, et cetera. So organizations that have been doing this have been, African Forum was doing this work. We also have, with the Check Both campaign, that's one of my timers. Colectivo Ile has also been doing this work here as well. Some information from their campaign. And so for us, one of the things we're thinking about is what are the ways that data might actually enter into how we think about this. One of the two different projects are the Criadas project and the Registro. The Criadas project is more specific to Dr. Bruno's work. I'm just going to give a really brief summary, which is that she is looking at the ways that out of an archive that catalogs different materials from archives, repositories, even churches, census materials, state materials around Puerto Rico. What are the ways that we can think about the kind of microbiographies out of that, and really pull out where women and girls appear? And what she's discovered, her and Carlos in cahoots as well, have discovered is that one of the ways that women and girls appear in documentation is as servants. As criadas. So one of the things she's investigating are what are the ways that this term begins to kind of catalog a race and gendered identity that actually gives us a window into thinking about Black women and girls, Black girlhood in the 19th century moving into the 20th century. And she has some amazing work on that. And one of the things we're working on is a co-authored piece that hopefully will be out sometime in the spring. That kind of brings together some of this information and some of the practices around that. And Carlos has been a research assistant on that. For my part, one of the things that I've been interested in is a different data set, the 1870, 71 to 1870, 71, 72, depending on which registro you're looking at. Registro Centrales Estados. So this is the page from that register. And this is a register that is created in order to, does everybody know about this register? American Commission? I love it when it's new. All right, so this is a register that is getting created in the kind of period leading up to La Ley More, that is going to catalog, essentially create a census, which is this interesting link to census and documentation within Black Puerto Rican organizing. That I think is important, that I'd love for us to talk about it. But eventually, it's essentially creating a census in order to indemnify, to pay back owners for the enslaved people property, quote unquote property, that they're about to lose as a result of emancipation. And so officials went throughout the island and created documentation like this that included a whole host of material that is important and potentially says a lot of different things just on the surface. The registro is interesting in how it even exists, right? So we're thinking about like who sort of has control over Black Puerto Rican memory and data. We've been talking about this in the last presentations. The Registro Central is at the National Archives in the US, right? It is there because it was here at the archives in Puerto Rico because it was formerly controlled by the Spanish. The registro itself was controlled by the Spanish. Then it moved with a whole host of other documentation to the National Archives in the US. At some point, it was put onto microfilm. And then at some point it was digitized. And so part of our work is actually trying to trace out those points, because that also is a map of empire and a map of the ways that we don't even always have control or access to our own documentation. And that documentation is also spread in so many different locales, which makes it hard to then collate and bring that history back together. Again, with like how we recover this memory. At some point, the digitized images, and we're trying to like figure out like who did it first. Did the National Archives digitize them, or did Folk 3 by Ancestry come and digitize them? But at some point, a relationship got created between Ancestry and the National Archives. And anybody who's sort of engaged in Ancestry knows they've been doing a lot of digitizing of a whole host of records. This is not unique. What they do, though, is that they do a lot of digitizing of the records that, in some cases, will make them available to the original archive, which is in practice in the public domain. But if anybody has tried to kind of navigate archives or encourage communities to navigate archives, those are not necessarily most accessible spaces. So in theory, the actual images go back to the original repository, but then it also exists online. But they exist online behind the paywall, because of course these are for-profit entities. And so Folk 3 has access to the registro, and you can access it for about $50, I think, a month. It's either 50 or 150, I forget which one it is. The ones that are available at the National Archives, so the other thing is that all of the different districts, like even in the 1870s, are not necessarily available. The ones that are available at the National Archives, there are 5. So you can see the ones that are available here. Right now, we have been working with the ones for Gurabo, the ones for Dorado, the ones Arecibo también. And so, but that is already also really interesting. Some of the districts have a lot of pages to move through, and some of the districts have very few. And I mean very few as in like difference between 90 and a couple of thousand, or more even. Some of them also have, different scripts, so some of them are easy to read and some of them are not. Each row in the register represents one enslaved person. Each column lists their data. So that's one way of thinking about sort of the tabular relationship on the page of each of the individuals. And then there are different fields this is from the original register, of how they're describing the individual. So, you can see this, their name. The important things here are the name of the person, the name of their owner, some information about, their status and some other kind of official, who the official is that's documenting it, observations, which tends, I think, for the most part to be blank, and then ligación. Within this, what we've also identified are two sort of subsets of this data set. So we think about how to organize the page into a possible database or set of tables. There's two different sort of breakdowns of these individuals. One is based on under their name. Ooh. Okay. All right, somebody's here. Based on their name, you have different information about their origin, free status, who their mother and father was, who their children were, et cetera, et cetera. So you get a sense of how the individuals in the state, in this case the Spanish Empire, are sort of thinking about how biography works for Africans at this time. And you have ligación, which is essentially all of the kind of biometrical data, all of the kind of surveillance state type of data. What does this person look like? And so what we're trying to do is really kind of think through, all right, what is this, what might this offer us? And this is how they look on the page. So they literally are like these kind of subtables, subsets. So this is the one that's related to the name, and the other one is ligación, and that's there. All right, so a few things. Again, Black Puerto Rican data is about thinking about our history, right? So one of the things we're trying to get a sense of is like, what is the history of these registers, right? So we're reading materials, reading folks who have been looking at these registers. I just want to shout out Fernanda Sapo, who's been doing a lot of work on the District 3 MoCo register. We're trying to kind of like really kind of flesh out how do these things exist. The other one is our ancestors. We are trying to understand, who are the individuals in here? So that's important, just as like, who are the people? But we're also trying to understand something about what meaning is being given behind these different breakdowns of data, right? Like, so what does it mean that ligación has all of these different kind of physical characteristics that need to be understood? And how are those giving us a kind of map of how to think about Blackness and how to enclose that and how the state might be using that in order to, you don't do what the state does to Black people, and so we're also really trying to understand that and break that down. I suspect that thinking about Black Puerto Rican data actually offers us a deeper roadmap to thinking about Blackness broadly. So thinking about Blackness within and also beyond biometrics, within and also beyond blood quantum. I also really think about that the states are very creative about how they want to control populations and finding ways of controlling but also erasing memories of Blackness and Africanness and histories of slavery. That's actually part of the work that's been happening in a Puerto Rican context, but I think in other places and broadly, in order to sever us from our histories of resistance, our histories of freedom, and our histories of imagining another way of living in the world and other possibilities. So I will leave it there. And yeah, thanks.
Thank you.
Miren, o sea, que no hay un micrófono que se mueva para...
Sí, ese que tienen ahí.
Ah, este que te... Okay, pero lo puedo sacar bien.
Por supuesto.
Okay. Now you guys sit down and then I'll pull up that chair. Can I use this chair?
Of course. Mira esta.
Gracias, Angela. Thank you very much. No. Señor mayor.
Préndelo, está prendido.
Ahora sí. Thank you so much, all three of you. This is I so many themes in common. You know, I think we did a good panel because we got I think it rhymes a lot. There was some you know, like doubts in the beginning, but because of the wide different contexts. But and fields, we have history and linguistics here represented, but I think the commonalities around data, around memory, are there and visible and clear. So I'm going to ask the first question just to prender los motores, and then I invite you to start thinking about, you know, what would you like to ask? Let's take this opportunity. What would you like to ask this distinguished panel, so we can have that conversation together before we do. But the first question is, so I'm a practical guy. You know, I enjoy theory, reading, and you know, tickles my brain. But at the end of the day, I want to do something. I want to fight for that liberation we talked about, and I want to see it concretely. I've been doing this and want to continue doing this. So the question for us is, so give me some tangible things that we can do in order to decolonize that data, to liberate that data, to liberate that memory. It could be at the institutional levels that we can operate. We have a little power within the institutions that we're located in, and we can do things to push institutions maybe here and there to be an actor in that future. It could be the communities themselves, but you know, there's always that, as Vivek would always joke, like, no, let the British take this stuff because they won't take care of that stuff anymore. That was a bad joke. I don't want that to be the answer. So how do we work though to build the infrastructure at the minimum, maybe that would allow that control to be back, so that the excuse is not like, well, we know how to take care of it. So I know it's a hard question, but I want to see us at least start trying, and then invite us all to think about this. How do we move to that future?
Oh, okay. So I have a kind of I have a perspective on this because I completed what I call a pandemic dissertation. And I was one of the very fortunate people that I actually had funding that I could travel to go and do research. And then 2020. It made absolutely no difference that I had the money to go and do the research because I couldn't go anywhere anyway. But what it made me realize is that the fact that I considered and that I did go and do a PhD, that was a level of privilege because I considered it. So I think that one of the things that we can do and we should try to do is to de-privilege knowledge. And one of the ways to do that is, and Dr. Fuller mentioned it in her talk, is to make research resources available open access without a paywall. Because those darn paywalls drive me crazy. I mean, for the midterm election, I was trying to see what my local newspaper was saying about the politicians who were running for office. They wanted me to pay. And I'm like, you want us to do our civic duty, but you're putting everything behind a paywall. What if I don't want to subscribe to the newspaper? I just want to see what you have to say about this one thing. So I think that we tend to privilege knowledge. Your phone? Yeah. We tend to privilege knowledge and even access to knowledge and access to the internet. You know, I was walking during the pandemic because I just assumed, well, I have AT&T, and if my AT&T doesn't work, I call AT&T and I tell them my AT&T is not working. Come fix my AT&T. Well, there was a woman who was parked at the elementary school, and I was like, what is she doing here? She was using the Wi-Fi. So we have, and I do not come from money. but I have a level of privilege, and I think that one of the things that we can do is to recognize our privilege and try to work out ways that we can deprivilege knowledge and access to knowledge.
Let's treat this like a conversation for now. What people think about, because the thing that's funny that you're the one whose answer, I know you're the first one, maybe that would have been another answer, but you're the one whose answer is that when your problem is that if you give access, you're the one with the dangers, because like your solution to the problem, let's document it and keep it safe. Let's keep it in hard drives and for now, like at least we have the data and keep it. That could have been like an answer, or like create the data but present it in a fuzzy way. That was the solution. I remember I was in that meeting.
Yeah.
Or your solution is like, no, let's deprivilege it by giving access when the internet doesn't have to be the answer. We were having this conversation about like, and even if we do, access won't be enough. Because a lot of people that have some really important data sets for Black history, Caribbean history, they say, well, it's open access, just download the zip file. Good luck.
Yeah.
While they have, while they control the interface and all the interpretation around the data, that they use their privilege to maintain within their ecosystem and control. And they just give you that zip file, no documentation, nothing. Just they didn't even tell you what's there. Right? We were talking about this yesterday. I just want to like push back a little bit. I'm like, access might not be enough.
You're right. Access is. Usually, I don't need to be mic'd. I have brothers, so. Yeah. Giving access is not enough because people don't always have access, and you're right. It's it's a conundrum. Because, in a project like the one that I'm involved with, where the sites are in such danger, not just from the natural elements, but also from people, local people, and also outside people, do we make that knowledge fuzzy, and we come back to what do we silence and who are we to decide what is to be silenced. So I'm gonna cop out and tell you I don't have an answer.
I wanted to, I think part of what I'm doing is trying to make sure that I'm thinking through community access, right? So that scholars have access. I mean, I'm a scholar. I want access to the data. I want to do research, and I want to do research that's meaningful to communities, but I think scholars having access is a byproduct of creating this access for communities, right? And so trying to think through, well, what's going to make sense for communities and not just, I think it's kind of the difference, like what you talked about yesterday in the workshop, the difference between a collection and exhibit, I think, right? So how can I contextualize this information? Because truly in urban centers in Belize, I don't know how many people still care about Anansi stories. I don't know how many people are still doing storytelling, right? So how can we give this collection a context and present it in a usable way? So one of the things that I'm doing, I'm collaborating with a colleague at Drexel to develop pedagogical materials. So first to use in the world language classrooms here, so that there's representation of Blackness in Spanish, right, in the Spanish language classrooms, and in Belize, and here, in the North as well, in Canada, the US, there's underrepresentation of Black learners in the world language classroom, studying Spanish as another language. There's underrepresentation of Blackness in the curriculum as well. So creating these pedagogical materials, we're hopeful that through this folklore, we can offer a way to bring some representation. And in Belize in particular, like an Anansi story told in Spanish is really relevant because that's part of Creole culture. And so Black Creole students in the Spanish language classroom can have something in the curriculum that they can relate. So thinking of a way that it's meaningful, trying to give it some context is kind of one of the ways that I'm trying to approach it. But putting aside legacy data, I think one of the things that I've learned through this work is that I would have done my own field work differently had I started with this legacy data set first, right? So a research data management plan is important. not just because funders, federal funding agencies are asking for this more and more, but really to think that you're creating a snapshot. As you're collecting data, you're creating a snapshot. So how are you going to care for that data? Are you going to want to preserve it, for later use? Understanding what it is, what snapshot you've taken, and really creating, I would say creating some metadata about the data as well, right? So as I'm working with the legacy data, there's lots of information that's missing that I wish was there. And so that's also helping to inform how I'm going to do things moving forward.
I'm really thinking about this question, and I think I want to think about the students in the room in particular, because I think that there is work that students are doing and can be doing that needs classroom support, faculty support, university support, whether it's folks doing their dissertations on these topics or whether it's learning skills. How are institutions, wherever they might be, university, K through 12, or community organizations, having the resources to make sure skills to understand data, to understand Black people, right? So that we're talking about, for me, it's about the context of Black Puerto Rican data, right? And Black data in particular. So how are students learning how to think about a spreadsheet, but also think about it in the context of how enslaved Africans, like the spreadsheet is in the genealogy of the slave ship register, right? Or the plantation, accounting book. And there's actually documentation, it's one of the slides I skipped over. There's actually history books that talk about like the managerial practices we have in the present day that now are Excel, but once upon a time were account books. Like that's a legacy of the massive economics and the massive okay, like but let's not put like our legacy of the need to have massive and mass-produced managerial practices for plantations and for slavery. So that like how do we make that part of the history that we tell about doing data work, and how are we training people to do the work to make tables, all of this, like I think that becomes really, really important because I think there is a way that we enter into this conversation differently. We're interested in Black history or Black diaspora, so we come into this and we want to know more about preservation and like how do we share this history that is so important. And or you are interested in the data side and creating websites, or thinking about code, and maybe you're less interested in some of the cultural implications, right? So there's a bridge there that also needs to happen. Or you're interested somewhere in the middle, and it is or is not about creating a website. It's about how organizations, how communities might use the information, right? So like maybe it's a website, maybe it's something that it lives on the web, but it actually is accessible via PDF. So like I think there's something that students need. So I'd love to hear from students what we all need, but also that that kind of micro level I think becomes really, really important because the tools are gonna break, right? Like at the end of the day, like the electricity might not work, so then what do you do with your website then? Or the Wi-Fi doesn't work, so how do you even access it, right? So the tools might break, but the information is there. So how are we planting seeds for that kind of liberatory praxis and understanding of the world that can then be used in a whole host of capacities? Like you just did it now, talking about collections versus exhibits. Like that's about wax and facets, but you just applied it in a whole different context, right? So thinking about how do we organize knowledge. So I think that there's something there that is really important.
I love that answer. That's a great way to open it up to the audience.
Yeah. So I had a question when all you were talking about the students. So how can we as students decolonize academic institutions and practices, which for years have excluded our voices as POC people and LGBTQ folk, especially since all of our culture and institutions carry whiteness and heteronormativity as centerness for historical data collection?
Facilita.
So I so students in some ways are organizing all kinds of ways. So I know y'all are already doing it. So you asked me a question. So I go up. I think students have to demand the courses that they want to see. They have to demand courses in Black history and decolonial history and all of that. There is demanding it from the faculty and the university. And the university needs to be responsive. We're talking about macro institutional support. Like we need to step up. We need to offer that information. We need to offer the workshops that allow folks to gain these skills, things like this workshop here. But there's also like, and I don't think anybody's doing this. I'm just saying like as far as praxis this, but there's also not waiting for the university to deliver that, right? Like we can gather in places and do reading groups or do skill shares or when the electricity works and when there's Wi-Fi, like be a part of workshops that you can learn wax. It really doesn't take that long to learn wax, and I'm a brick, so like you can do it. Like we can learn some of the skills, and then you share them. Like being generous and capacious and committing to like that kind of engagement with each other and beyond, the campus is, I think, part of the work that happens. But the organizing is the organizing, I think.
I agree with what Dr. Johnson said in that you need to show interest because, and forgive me, university administration, at the end. At the end of the day, it comes down to money. So you have to, and somehow I always manage to come back to money, and I am like so not a money person. I like money, but you have, as students, you have to show that there is an interest so that they can understand that there is an added value and it's monetary. So, ask for the classes, and when the classes are offered, register for them and stick with them. We were talking about starting a specific program at the university where I'm at, and the one thing that they kept coming back to is, well, we tried and nobody registered. So if you don't register, then that's the way that they gauge your interest in the classes that are being offered. If you're not registering for the classes, they're not going to offer them anymore because they have to pay the faculty, and they have to, and if they don't see that they're getting a value on a return on their investment, then they're going to remove the classes from the books, or they're going to keep it on the books, but they're just not going to offer them.
Vamos.
We're approachable.
Dice, espérate. Quedan 5 minutos, ¿no? Ya.
Yeah, thank you all for your presentations. They were really amazing. Hearing you all talk, I started thinking about that maybe while the question of making data accessible may be a bit problematic in terms of like different contexts, making the knowledge to work with that data, which is what you were pointing at, like the knowledge of reading that data, and particularly the knowledge of telling stories with that data in different contexts, taking that data out to the communities, taking those stories, giving the knowledge not just to read the data, but to make those stories in different ways. It might be through performances, through music, through different media, and maybe that would be like a possible way to start liberating that data through the stories, not through the data itself.
So anybody want to respond to the more of a comment, less of a question? It was a good comment. Yeah. So maybe we have time for one little question.
Hi, this is a question from the live stream. It says, They have two questions, but I think there's only one. I'm gonna read it directly, so in case there's any type of error. I am very intrigued by the first presenter's comments on data visualization tools, geospatial mapping as a potential space of memorialization, and wonder if the panel might speak to that concept, either in the specifics of this example or in a broader context, especially given our obligations to home communities in the Caribbean that might need integrated high-tech, low-tech, and no-tech options in order to best serve them and not replicate colonial models of extraction.
That's a great question. So not only data, but the visualization and maps in specific as forms of narrative, as narrative forms. It's a good question. And if you want to start.
No, you can.
It works for you.
No, it's okay. Well, thank you so much for the question. I hope I do justice in the answer. I think that helping people to visualize what exists in the, like, for example, the forts that I'm working with in this project, makes them more real for them. And, maybe that will, prompt them to try and preserve them, and also to work with the data and in seeing where they're placed and to explore what the stories are that surround the forts. And there are the historical stories. There are also the local stories, because the natives who are there have stories about the forts and, how their ancestors worked on the forts. And a lot of that is passed down through an oral tradition. So that, what I'm saying now is a little bit difficult because of the political situation in Haiti right now. So actually going in country and speaking to the locals is not something that is necessarily possible right now. But yeah, I think I answered the question.
Anybody, we have like 1 minute. Anybody want to?
Yes. And yes, the mapping and the visualization is really important. There are ways to do it really low tech. Dr. Keel has also been teaching some of us about that. There's ways to do it much more high tech, but all things in conversation, I think, which I think is what you've been saying, and speaks to making things about stories. And so I'm glad. I just want to just say again, thank you for that comment. That question was actually a comment, but it was actually a really good comment, and one that put into clearer words sort of something that I was trying to get at, that I think might curl all the way over, which is that this is about stories and it's about people. That it's not about data and numbers, and that kind of like where do we locate people is part of that story. Although what you're also suggesting is that we gotta be careful about, this, we've got to practice of marnage, like not being seen.
Yeah.
So, your work is also speaking to that.
Okay, so not in response to the question, but to the earlier question from the student about the university structure. I think that I just want to offer hope, I guess, in terms of doing this work, because the fact that that question was posed means that you're already doing the work, right? And being in those systems, these hegemonic systems, really, where money is a huge motivating factor in terms of what decisions are made, whether there's money or not, right? Because some institutions that have surpluses are kind of making the same decisions as institutions that are low resource institutions. And so I just want to, darle aplauso to the resistance that's already being done, right? The fact that those questions came up, these comments that we've had, y solo darle aplauso a esos actos.
And to you too. Thank you. Queremos dar el próximo paso.
Sí.
El próximo paso es que los queremos invitar a todos a almorzar. Va a haber un almuerzo a cargo de Comedores Sociales de Puerto Rico.
Lo vamos a servir en el centro multiusos del centro de estudiantes, en el salón multiusos. Así que acompáñennos a caminar hasta el centro. Y a mí me gustaría pedir una parada en las escaleras del teatro para tomar una foto grupal, porque quedan muy lindas ahí y en nuestro informe se ven muy bien. Háganme por favor esa petición para pararnos ahí un momento y tomarnos una foto.
Quedó chulo,
Sí. Los esperamos a la 1:30. De vuelta aquí para el segundo panel. Gracias.
Están todos los tuyos. El equipo tuyo me lo que tenía.
Sí.
Bien.